From a very young age, Joshua's life was marked by loss and challenges, but also by a demonstration of love he would never forget. At just 3 years old, a tragic car accident took his mother's life, leaving him alone and directionless. His father, absent since birth, never assumed any responsibility. That's when Susan, his maternal grandmother, then 53 years old, took on the challenging mission of raising him. Susan, who had already raised her own children amidst countless hardships, now had to start over, but this time at a stage in life where her body wasn't as strong. To ensure Joshua had a home, however simple, she devoted herself to exhausting days as a house cleaner, working from morning to night. Each workday was a battle against fatigue but also a victory for keeping her grandson safe. The house they lived in was old and filled with problems. The walls were damp, the roof threatened to collapse with every heavy rain, and the winter cold seeped mercilessly through the window cracks. There were many moments when Susan didn't know how she would pay the bills or put food on the table, but she never gave up. To Joshua, Susan was much more than a grandmother. She was a mother, a father, and his greatest inspiration. Even amidst so many difficulties, she never allowed him to miss school or stop dreaming. Susan taught the boy that effort, even in the face of pain, was the path to a dignified life. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and that was enough for Susan. Yet Joshua, even at a young age, began to sense the weight of responsibility his grandmother carried alone, and within him grew the desire to change their situation. After all, unconditional love also means sacrificing for the one who never gave up on you. By the time Joshua turned 16, he was already a young man accustomed to carrying responsibilities far beyond his years. Susan, now 66, was visibly more fragile. The years of hard work had taken their toll on her body, constant back pain, calloused hands, and a once boundless energy that was now fading. Even so, she never complained. Her tired smile and loving eyes still brightened the hard days they shared. The house they lived in, however, reflected the daily struggles they faced. Every corner showed signs of time and neglect forced by a lack of resources. When it rained, the leak seemed more intense than the storm itself, forcing them to scatter buckets and rags across the floor. During the winter, cold winds would blow through the gaps in the walls, making the freezing nights almost unbearable. Despite all of Susan's efforts, the necessary repairs were financially impossible. Joshua, in turn, faced his own challenges outside the house. At school, escaping mockery was difficult. His clothes, always clean but patched and worn, were a constant source of teasing. He felt ashamed and avoided any situation that might expose his reality to his classmates. For this reason, he never invited anyone to his home and often made excuses to skip parties or school activities. But even amidst these difficulties, there was something in Joshua that set him apart: his determination. He knew his grandmother had sacrificed everything to provide him with the bare minimum, and that inspired him. Susan, with her quiet strength, was a living example of resilience and unconditional love. Although the problems seemed overwhelming, Joshua began to feel a growing strength within him, a need to change their reality. It wasn't fair that Susan, the woman who had given everything for him, lived with so little. Above all, he knew it was his turn to fight for her. That house, with its fragile walls and precarious roof, would not be the end of their story. Joshua began to dream of something bigger, even if he didn't yet know how to achieve it. One stormy night, unlike any Joshua and Susan had faced before, the rain pounded against the fragile windows while the wind howled through the cracks of their old house. As usual, buckets were scattered throughout the rooms to catch the leaks, but that night, nothing seemed sufficient to hold back the water. Shortly after midnight, a deafening crash echoed through the house. The roof, already weakened by time and lack of maintenance, gave way in one of the rooms. Susan, who slept on a small mattress near the area, woke up to the sound and saw pieces of wood and tiles falling just a few feet away. Joshua ran to her in panic, fearing the worst, but found her sitting on the bed, shaken but unharmed. The scene, however, was a turning point for the young man. Seeing his grandmother in that state, curled up amidst the chaos, broke his heart in a way he had never felt before. In that moment, he made a promise to himself: Susan would no longer live like this. She deserved so much more than sacrifices and hardships. She deserved a safe, dignified home where she could finally rest without fear of storms or life's burdens. Joshua decided he would build a new house for his grandmother, one that was solid, comfortable, and reflected the love and gratitude he felt for her. But there was a problem, many problems, actually. He had no money, no tools, and no idea where to start. Still, something inside Joshua told him he couldn't give up. Maybe it was the same strength that had kept Susan going all these years, or maybe it was the love he felt for her. He wasn't sure, but one thing was clear: he would give everything he had to fulfill that promise, even if he had no clue how to make it happen. With his heart full of determination, Joshua wiped away the tears that streamed down silently and looked at his grandmother. She was tired, but she smiled at him, as she always did, offering a strength that only true love could provide. It was the beginning of a difficult journey, but Joshua was ready to face any storm to ensure Susan would never have to be afraid again. After the night when the roof collapsed, Joshua woke up the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that building a house for his grandmother would be the biggest undertaking of his life, but there was no room for hesitation. Determined, he began searching for any type of job he could do after school. Before long, Joshua became a familiar face around the neighborhood, always carrying tools or hauling heavy bags. He mowed lawns, cleaned yards, washed cars, and delivered newspapers. No job was too small or beneath him. Every dollar saved was one step closer to his dream. At first, his earnings barely made a dent, but Joshua didn't get discouraged. He knew every cent mattered. In the moments he wasn't working, he dedicated himself to learning. With his old phone, Joshua watched online tutorials on carpentry, construction, and repairs. He jotted down everything in an old notebook, detailing the materials he would need and the techniques he wanted to master. His dreams were big, but his approach was methodical. As part of his sacrifices, Joshua began selling the few belongings he had. His bike, which he had used to get to school, was one of the first things to go. He also sold some books, games, and even the old radio that had kept him company on quiet nights. Each item sold was a tough decision, but the dream was bigger than anything material. Susan, unaware of what was happening, started to worry. She noticed her grandson coming home late, tired, his clothes dirty from soil and sweat. "You're pushing yourself too hard, Joshua. This isn't fair to you," she said, her eyes welling up with tears. He would just smile and respond, "I'm doing this for us, Grandma. Trust me." The situation grew even more complicated when Susan, already frail from age and years of hard work, fell temporarily ill. Her back pain worsened, and she had to cut back on her cleaning jobs. This meant less money for bills and even more pressure on Joshua. Even then, he didn't waver. He doubled his efforts, taking on even more jobs and adjusting his routine to care for Susan while continuing to save for the construction. The nights were long and exhausting, but Joshua never complained. Every drop of sweat, every ache in his body fueled his determination. He knew he was doing something monumental, something that would change his grandmother's life forever. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but the love he felt for Susan was even greater. Day by day, Joshua threw himself into his work with what seemed like endless energy. He knew he was still far from his goal, but he also knew that as long as he kept fighting, he was on the right path. The dream of giving his grandmother the home she deserved kept his hope alive, even during the toughest moments. Joshua's efforts didn't go unnoticed. Around the neighborhood, people began to notice his relentless routine, always rushing from one job to the next, carrying construction materials and working alone on the small plot next to their old house. When they learned about his plan, the neighbors were deeply moved by his dedication and the obvious love he had for his grandmother. News of Joshua's dream spread quickly. The first help came from Mrs. Margaret, an elderly neighbor who, though she didn't have much money, donated a bucket of paint she had stored in her garage. Soon after, Mr. Robert, a retired mason who lived on the corner, offered something even more valuable, his time and expertise. One afternoon, he visited Joshua and said, "I can teach you how to put up these walls. Let's do it together." Joshua was speechless. He had never imagined that others would get involved in his project. But the generosity didn't stop there. Other neighbors started donating materials, bags of cement, used tools, and leftover wood from their yards. Some even offered to help with the heavy labor on weekends. Little by little, the small plot began to transform. On Saturdays, the space came alive. Mr. Robert taught Joshua how to mix cement in the right proportions, align bricks, and use a level to ensure the walls were sturdy. Other neighbors helped carry materials, while the neighborhood kids brought bottles of water to combat the heat. There was a different energy in the air, as if Joshua's determination had sparked something special in the community. Even with all the help, the construction was not easy. The work was grueling, and Joshua, already worn from months of sacrifice, felt his body growing more fatigued. His hands were covered in calluses, and his muscles ached daily. But every time he laid a brick or spent the day laboring under the sun, his mind returned to Susan's smile. He knew this wasn't just his dream, it was his way of giving back for everything she had done for him. The construction progressed slowly but with purpose. With each wall raised, the vision of a safe and dignified home for Susan became clearer. The small garden she had always dreamed of was already part of his plans, and Joshua had even sketched where to place a rocking chair so she could finally rest. The support from the community taught Joshua an important lesson. Though he had started the journey alone, the love and empathy of others were essential in turning his dream into reality. He wasn't just building a house, he was bringing people together around a larger cause. And so, through sweat, laughter, and carefully placed bricks, Joshua's dream began to take shape. Every detail of the house was a testament to the unconditional love he felt for Susan and the strength that came from his determination, now amplified by the kindness of those around him. The goal was closer than ever, and Joshua knew the best was yet to come. The sun rose timidly on the horizon, but for Joshua, that day was special before it even began. After months of hard work, sleepless nights, and countless sacrifices, the big moment had finally arrived. The house was complete. It wasn't a mansion, but it was everything he had envisioned, a safe, cozy home, and above all, a dignified one, just as his grandmother Susan had always deserved. The walls, now sturdy and painted in a soft tone he had chosen, seemed to whisper stories of resilience and love. The roof, solid and well-constructed, promised to withstand any storm. In the small garden by the entrance, Joshua planted the first flowers, daisies, Susan's favorite. Every detail of the house, from the strong foundation to the windows that let in natural light, bore the mark of his dedication and his desire to give his grandmother a refuge where she could finally live in peace. With everything ready, Joshua invited Susan to accompany him to the site. She still didn't know what awaited her. "Joshua, why are you so excited?" she asked as he guided her, his eyes shining with anticipation. When they reached the entrance of the house, Susan stopped, confused. "What is this, my boy?" she asked, looking at the structure in front of her. Joshua smiled, his heart racing with emotion, and replied, "It's your house, Grandma. The house you deserve. All of this is for you." For a moment, silence filled the air. Susan brought her hands to her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears. She looked around, taking in every detail thoughtfully planned, realizing the immense sacrifices it had required. Tears began to stream down her face, and she finally said, her voice trembling, "You've turned everything I ever dreamed of into reality. I can't find the words to express how much this means to me." Joshua, overwhelmed, embraced her tightly. For him, that moment was more than just a material accomplishment. It was proof that all the effort, pain, and sacrifices had been worth it. Susan no longer had to worry about leaks or fragile walls. Now, she had a place where she could rest, a home that was more than just bricks and cement. It was a testament to her grandson's love. When Susan stepped through the door for the first time, she touched the walls as if trying to absorb every piece of that dream. The small garden brought a spontaneous smile to her face, and the simple yet cozy bedroom was everything she had ever wanted. That day, as he watched Susan explore her new home, Joshua felt something he had never experienced before: complete happiness. He had given the woman who raised him alone, with so much love and sacrifice, the dignity and security she deserved. For them, it wasn't just the beginning of a new life. It was proof that, with determination and love, even the greatest challenges can be overcome. The new house wasn't just a refuge for Susan, it was a symbol of everything she and Joshua had faced and conquered together. With sturdy walls, a blossoming garden, and the peace of knowing storms would no longer affect them, Susan was finally able to live her days in tranquility. For the first time in decades, she felt she could rest, free from the burdens that had weighed on her for so long. Retirement came as a well-deserved relief. Susan spent her mornings tending to the small garden Joshua had planted with so much care. There, she found joy in watching the flowers bloom, as if each petal was a living reminder that love and sacrifice always find their reward. The smile that exhaustion had once dimmed now lit up her face every day. Meanwhile, the story of Joshua and Susan began to gain attention from the community and, eventually, from other towns. The example of a young man who, with determination and love, built a new life for his grandmother touched the hearts of many. Letters, comments, and even donations arrived at the door of their new home, accompanied by messages of support and gratitude for inspiring others to believe in the power of resilience and family bonds. For Joshua, however, this was only the beginning. The journey he had walked alongside Susan awakened a greater purpose within him. With the support of some neighbors who had believed in him from the start, Joshua began studying civil engineering. He wanted to use what he had learned to help other families who, like his, faced struggles in search of a safe home. Every brick he had laid in the past now served as inspiration to build brighter futures for others. Today, Joshua and Susan live happily in the house they built together with so much sacrifice and love. Susan, who dedicated her life to her grandson, can finally reap the rewards of her devotion, seeing Joshua grow into a determined and selfless young man. Joshua, in turn, learned that the true meaning of wealth doesn't lie in material possessions but in gratitude, unconditional love, and the ability to turn challenges into opportunities.